Russia's state nuclear company says that it's evacuated nearly 200 workers from Iran's Bushehr nuclear plant in the south, and that's after a strike near its vicinity killed a security guard and damaged a support building. Russia partly constructed the Bushehr nuclear plant in Iran and helps operate it. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency says there's been no increase in radiation levels, but it is expressing deep concern. In fact, the head of the World Health Organization has also raised the alarm, saying in a statement, the last incident involving the Bushehr nuclear power plant is a stark reminder a strike could trigger a nuclear accident with health impacts that would devastate generations. With every passing day of this escalating conflict, the stakes and threats are raised higher and higher, and we must de-escalate now. Peace is the best medicine. Bushehr nuclear power plant is located on the Gulf Coast, and it's producing about 1 gigawatt for around 1 million homes. It's Iran's only active nuclear plant. It was built by Russia, uses a pressurized water reactor that runs on Russian-supplied uranium and is under IAEA supervision. The IAEA warns that an attack or loss of cooling could cause radioactive release or a meltdown with serious regional impact. Gulf states have also raised safety concerns. Well, let's go to Robert Kelley, who's a former IAEA inspector, and he's currently a distinguished fellow with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, joining us live now from Vienna. Thank you very much, Kelley, for speaking to us. You're the exact person we want to speak to because of your experience. How worried or concerned should we be? Because this is the first time, I believe, in this war that we've heard there where they're sounding the alarm that this could potentially be catastrophic.
Good afternoon, Sarah. I've been asked to answer this question a lot of times, particularly with respect to Ukraine. Now, when I look at it in Iran, I look at it and think, what is the worst case? Normally, I would start with the best. But here we're seeing very uncivilized behavior on the part of the warring parties. And what I would worry about most would be that someone would try to attack the spent fuel ponds that are outside of the containment structure. If somebody really wants to cause a major problem, they would go after those spent fuel ponds, and they are outside the construction of the reactor itself, that big concrete dome, and you could cause a very major radiation release there. It still would be mostly confined to that province of Iran, unless the wind, of course, is blowing across the Gulf to the UAE. Or to that part of Saudi Arabia. But in general, it would cause a major problem. You'd have to evacuate probably a number of square miles, and it would be a dangerous place for a long time. That's kind of the worst case. Normally, when I'm asked this question, I would leave that to last. But in this particular case, they're not behaving in a civilized way there.
I mean, we have heard from the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and he's the one that sort of sounded the alarm. Should we then take that very seriously?
I think so. One thing I would throw into this is people seem to be shooting in the direction of the plant, and people say they missed. Well, that isn't necessarily true. They may be shooting for spots that they intend to hit, which are near the plant, and that would be to try to drive the plant into shutdown. That would be a normal, shall I say, responsible wartime effort to just deprive the country of the electricity from that plant, but not damage the plant itself. So if someone is shooting near the plant and intentionally missing the most critical parts, that could also be what's going on. And of course, the other thing that we ought to look at here, I don't get asked so often, is remember there are 4 very large pressurized water plants in the UAE just across the Gulf. So we're not just looking at Bushehr.
So if an incident was to happen and there was a leak, I mean, for those like myself just across the water really from Iran, how long would it take to affect other areas? And what would we be looking for exactly?
Well, it's literally a matter of which way the wind is blowing. If someone who is attacking the plant wants to protect the Gulf countries, to protect the UAE and that part of Saudi Arabia, then they would wait until the wind was blowing away. And for the most part, the danger would occur in the first hours after the event and would be restricted to Iran and maybe to some downwind of Afghanistan. But they probably are looking at the wind and deciding when to shoot. If someone shot when Hit the spent fuel pond, for example, when the wind is blowing west, you'd probably start to see some effects, maybe not terribly fatal effects in the UAE, but health levels of health danger that you probably would have a lot of people evacuating.
I mean, if they're looking at the wind, as you say before, attacking, surely that's really dangerous, isn't it? And who would hold the US and Israel accountable? Or is there any mechanism to be able to stop this from happening in the first place?
There's all kinds of uncivilized behavior going on in this conflict, in this war, I should say, right now. And if they want to give up on all the rules of civilized behavior and hit an operating nuclear plant, I don't know who could hold them to account. The whole war, I don't know who's going to hold them to account, but there's tremendous amount of damage going on, tremendous amount of property damage, people damage, and hitting this plant would, I don't know, in sort of a way, it would double the hazard for people in Iran. Again, if the wind is blowing into Iran, which is what I would think people would do if they didn't want to hurt the Gulf neighbors, then the damage would be pretty much restricted to Iran.
So if
if you look at the event from Chernobyl, from Chernobyl, it was within a few hundred kilometers that the really bad events took place. It was very detectable at greater ranges, but a few hundred kilometers is where you expect to see effects that would make people want to evacuate.
I mean, it's quite worrying when you see, for example, Israel is involved in this war because, it is accused of genocide in Gaza and it has a history of not being held accountable. And for many people, they'll be worried whether they can rely on the authorities. So for you and me or anyone else at home, what could a person do to prepare if any such event was to happen?
Well, I imagine that the government would be in the business of disseminating iodine pills, which just goes into the thyroid, which is probably the most affected organ in the body in the case of a release from fresh fuel. And in that particular case, if they have the iodine pills to distribute, people would probably not suffer. They definitely wouldn't suffer any immediate effects, but it could shorten people's lives in the long run.
All right, thank you very much for speaking to us there and sort of explaining to us the situation when it comes to that nuclear power plant and any concerns. Robert Kelley there, former International Atomic Energy Agency inspector.